Erev Tov, Dobry вечер. Welcome and thank you for attending tonight's presentation and a book launch by Professor Yohanan Petrovsky-Shtern. Professor Petrovsky-Shtern, who holds his Ph.D. from the University of Moscow and Brandeis, is the Crown Family Professor of Jewish Studies and a Professor of Jewish History at the Department of History, Northwestern University. He has published several books, including Jews in the Russian Army, 1827 to 1917, drafted into Modernity in the year 2008, The Anti-Imperial Choice, The Making of the Ukrainian Jew in the year 2009, and incidentally this book is a winner of the American Association of Ukrainian Studies Book Award, and also Lenin's Jewish Question in the year 2010. His books Evrei в Russkoi armii and Evreiskii vopros Leninu appeared in Russian. His chapters for the 3-volume Toldot, yehudey, Rusya, I hope I pronounced it more or less correctly, appeared in Hebrew, and his Anti-Imperial book, I believe, appeared in Ukraine in 2013.
Has to appear in 2014.
Okay, sorry.
My translators are busy in the Maidan, so they have...
Professor Petrovsky-Shtern has finished a new book, The Golden-Age Shtetl, and together with his colleague Dean Bell is working on a documentary history of the Jews in the early modern world between the years 1450 and 1750. History of Jews in Europe, particularly in Ukraine, goes back hundreds of years. It is a well-known fact that during this time Jewish people had to live through some really tragic events, had to endure, and they suffered greatly. To this day, the very topic of Ukrainian-Jewish relations is often portrayed through the prism of a constant conflict, and is highly politicized in both scholarly and non-scholarly environments. However, the Ukrainian-Jewish relations in their entirety cannot be reduced to the time of conflicts alone. The dynamics of those relations was far more complex than that, It featured years and decades of coexistence, tolerance, common interests, pastime, and more. I don't want to preempt the speaker, but judging from the very topic of his latest book, there apparently was even the golden age for Jewish people in Ukrainian lands. So with that being said, with the help of Professor Yohanan Petrovsky-Shtern, we all expect to further explore little-known but nonetheless important dynamics of everyday life of Jews and Slavs in Ukrainian market towns. Professor Petrovsky-Shtern,
thank you,
the floor is yours.
Щиро дякую. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here. It's my second time in this blessed city. I really enjoy welcoming atmosphere here, and I hope I'll share with you some interesting things today. But let me do this. When I look at the subject matter of my lecture, if I live in Toronto or in Kyiv or in Lviv or in Edmonton, I would shrug my shoulders and say, how can he do that when such things are going today on in Ukraine? So with this idea on mind, I came to the celebration of the publication of my book at Northwestern University 3 weeks ago. That was March the 7th. And I was given more than anybody else to celebrate my book because I published 3 books last year. Everybody in the department was given 1.5 minutes. I was given 3.5 minutes to talk about my 3 books. So instead of doing that, discussing my books, I decided to remind my colleagues that March the 7th was 2 days before the 200th anniversary of Shevchenko, and I read to them out loud the poem that I would like to read to you today, because I do think that what is going on in Ukraine should be remembered and should be on our agenda, on the top of it. Мені однаково, чи буду я жить в Україні, чи ні. Чи хто згадає, чи забуде мене в снігу на чужині? Однаковісінько мені. В неволі виріс між чужими, і неоплаканий своїми в неволі плачучи умру, і все з собою заберу. Малого сліда не покину на нашій славній Україні, на нашій не своїй землі. І не пом'яне батько з сином, не скаже синові: молись, молися, сину, за Вкраїну. Його замучили колись. Мені однаково, чи буде той син молитися, чи ні. Та не однаково мені, як Україну злі люди присплять лукаві, і вогні її окраденою збудять. Ох, не однаково мені. Thank you. Do you need English? No. Sure. Okay. But one language which is not my native, and another language which is also not my native. So let's see how I manage. The translation is, the poem is written by Shevchenko in prison in Peter and Paul Fortress in 1847. Translation is by Clarence Manning, done in 1942. It makes no difference to me if I shall live or not in Ukraine, or whether anyone shall think of me mid foreign snow and rain. It makes no difference to me. In slavery I grew mid strangers, unwept by any kin of mine. In slavery I now will die and vanish without any sign. I shall not leave the slightest trace upon our glorious Ukraine, our land, but not as ours known. No father will remind his son or say to him, repeat one prayer for him, for our Ukraine. They tortured him in their foul lair. It makes no difference to me if that son says a prayer or not. It makes great difference to me that evil folk and wicked men attack our Ukraine, once so free, and rob and plunder it at will. That makes great difference to me. Okay, having said that, let me bring you back to the late 18th century. That is where I start my book. The Golden-Age Shtetl, covers basically three provinces that are known today as Podillia, Volhynia, and Kiev provinces. Between the years the 1780s and the 1840s. That's the period that I define as the Golden-Age Shtetl. What I'll share with you today is my insights into one of the aspects of this Golden-Age Shtetl. I'll talk for a second, what do I call by Shtetl? The rest is in the book. I would encourage you to take a look at the book. The book is available for sale. We have enough copies to satisfy almost everybody in the room, and we also have a discounted form, order form for you to send to Princeton, and they will send you the discounted book. Jews are fools, goes a Ukrainian proverb. They have vodka and they sell it. Жиди дурні, мають горілку і продають її. This centuries-old piece of Slavic wisdom might not be accurate anthropologically, but historically it is, particularly the second part. Some Jews drank vodka, yet a disproportionately large number of them dealt in the liquor trade. This marriage of convenience between Jews and alcohol goes back to the early 16th century manorial economy. To secure their well-being, the magnates granted Jews with their privilege to produce and sell liquor, called a propinatia. Peasants on the magnate estate could purchase liquor only in the local taverns and inns. If a private Polish town has a privilege of propinatia that permits the magnates to produce and sell liquor, it is a shtetl. That is to say, it is a private Polish town where Jews fulfill certain very important economic function. Demography doesn't matter. You can have 20 Jews, you can have 40,000 Jews. It will still be a shtetl or misteczko українською мовою in Ukrainian, or miasteczko in Polish, miasteczko in Russian. Since the manorial economy drew on serf labor, grain was cheap and stable, but vodka increased in price. While annual fairs attracted trade to the towns, vodka helped convert grain surplus into local assets. People came to the fair, traded, and went to taverns to celebrate their deals. Vodka became for the magnate economy what the Polish zloty for the crown treasury, currency. The magnates deemed Poles capable of producing but incapable of selling vodka, and Ukrainian peasants incapable of either. Somebody else had to help them translate grain into money. They leased this privilege to the Jews. By the time of the partitions of Poland, the liquor trade had become the Jewish occupation par excellence. For the founders of Slavic Romanticism, such as Gogol, Mickiewicz, and Shevchenko, the quintessential Jew was, of course, a tavern keeper. Yankel, everybody knows that. After the partitions, the Jewish tavern found itself under the Russian Empire. Catherine II introduced the liquor monopoly system in 1767, extended it to the newly acquired territories, and created the liquor trade monopolies. Make your best bid. Receive a liquor monopoly and collect all the income from liquor trade in a certain locality, she said. Following the Polish experience, Catherine was sure that this arrangement would be profitable. Liquor monopolists, she knew, relied on state protection and repaid the state with higher bids for the local monopolies. Direct income from selling liquor monopoly licenses increased from 7 million to 10 million rubles in the 1780s and up to 300 million rubles in 1894. At the height of Russian industrialization, liquor trade revenues yielded 25% of the country's annual budget. In the mid-19th century, the entire Kiev province made about 3.5 million rubles in taxes, of which 500,000 ruble came from breweries and 1 million ruble from excise taxes. That is 45% of the income of the province came from the sale of liquor and other beverages, alcoholic beverages. Compare these numbers with the amounts of money the landowners received from their serfs, 10% of the entire income at best. Even if the Jewish population in some shtetls was small, Jewish liquor trade yielded 65 to 80% of the magnate's income. The more economically attractive was the shtetl, the more liquor it sold, and the more it sold, the more economically attractive it became. Taverns hit their highest sales rates during fairs. Fair is ярмарок, українською мовою. This is the second privilege that existed in the shtetl and what defines shtetl economically as the Jewish place. Again, demography doesn't help us to understand what makes a town into a shtetl. You can have 40,000 people, 20,000 people, 40% of Jews, 65% of Jews, 10% of Jews. But if the magnate, Polish noble, owns a town and has these two privileges, propinacja, the right to produce and sell liquor, and to organize annual fairs and have bazaar days, this is something that Jews would be mostly doing, and that what defines them economically in that particular locality, and that is exactly what makes a town into a shtetl. Annual fair and liquor. The Boguslav district boasted of about 100 annual fairs and sold 43,000 buckets of vodka. In the Uman district, there were about 200 taverns and 22 roadside inns, which sold about 64,000 buckets of wine and vodka annual. Of course, most consumers came from elsewhere in the province to trade at the marketplace. Still, according to the figures, every dweller in the Uman district, just for example, drank on average 1 bucket of vodka per year, and in Lipovitz, 3. I cannot explain why, but that's what I get from figures. Tavern keeping was much more profitable than serfdom, the cornerstone of the Russian rural economy. The liquor business shaped the shtetl industry, trade, and finance. Vodka became shtetl's hard currency and the source of energy. Its steady flow was responsible for most of the town's economic well-being. Whoever controlled the liquor trade controlled the shtetl. However, Alexander I, and Nicholas I realized that their enlightened zeal that prompted them, they have to put an end to liquor trade, was at odds with their sober economic management. The laws reflected the domineering autocratic ideology, whereas the economic realities reflected the mercantile goals. As long as the Russian regime maintained this paradox, the shtetl enjoyed its privileges, revenues, and a good drink. Let me take you into a tavern. The tavern was as important for ordinary Jews as the synagogue. You can laugh. What Jews could not discuss freely in the synagogue, they could easily chat about in the tavern. Despite its unhealthy environment, ordinary Jews liked their taverns. Jews gave them proper names: feminine, tender, diminutive, almost erotic. Golubka, vidumka, chubataya, that is to say, the dove, fantasy, or with a forelock. For shtetl dwellers, the tavern became the nexus of all secular networks: social, psychological, economic, financial, and informational. The tavern functioned as a psychiatrist's office, a want ads page, a club, and a pub all in one. In taverns, Jews discussed business, looked for and found jobs, cut deals, compared commissions, traded in commodities, purchased groceries and haberdashery, engaged in matchmaking, changed and fed horses, repaired wagons, lent and borrowed money, spent the night on their way to a fair, shared news, hired servants or peasants as part-timers, played billiards or cards, listened to the Russian officers and Polish gentry gossip about politics, always, of course, observed Gentile fashion and Christian wedding celebrations, sang songs and listened to music, and yes, of course, they also ate, drank, smoked, and danced. From the brief notes of travelers, one can glimpse what could be obtained, seen, or heard at the tavern. Grand Duke Nicholas, the future Nicholas I, had coffee in a Jewish tavern in Lithuania and borrowed a wagon with horses to continue on. The Decembrist Laurer, one of the participants in the 1825 rebellion, known as the Decembrist Rebellion, learned top-secret information from Jews in tavern about the arrest of his companions. Poles spent their time in the inns and taverns during annual fairs. They played cards, bet on horse races, and spoke Polish among themselves. Taverns were many, so tavern keepers had to be inventive in order to attract clients. Some installed billiard tables and clavichords. Many tavern keepers sold barrels, half barrels, and shtofs, rectangular heavy glass bottles with the Russian Tsar's insignia. Some taverns provided breakfast or dinner, others a bed without meals, but they all offered a wide variety of drink. In some cutting-edge taverns, one could sample sherry and French vodka, rum, absinthe, local and important fruit and grape wines, fashionable coffees and chocolate, picot tea and tobacco. In some fancy, centrally located taverns, the authorities forbade selling cheap drinks: root beer, kvass, brandy beer, and mead. For that, one had to go around the corner to a regular pub or buy a glass from a private winery in a shtetl house cellar. Taverns provided relief for the repressed libido of the shtetl. You say libido in English or libido? Libido, okay. You never know. You know, you in Canada, you really mispronounce every good Greek or Roman word. Russians, Poles, and Jews sought an escape in the tavern from all sorts of religious, social, and cultural prohibitions. Hasidic masters, the spiritual authorities for many shtetl Jews, understood the enormous psychological power of the tavern. They could have legitimately argued that immersing oneself in the blatant physicality of the tavern was incompatible with Judaic piety, but instead they chose to uplift and spiritualize its pleasures. They even claimed that what Jews did in the taverns could bring themselves closer to God, of course. Rabbi Pinchas of Koretz considered drinking a positive and even a mystical experience. Jews, he said, came from a word achdus, or achdut, unity. This was their main secret. And the secret comes out when wine goes in, to quote a well-known Jewish proverb, Niknas yain yatsa sod. Therefore, when Jews drink, the secret becomes apparent, and the sense of unity and fraternal love brings them closer to one another. It's a very interesting Hasidic homily. Inhabitants of the shtetl like their taverns precisely because of the blurred line between home privacy and public exposure. For one night, a traveler became a member of the household, and the Jewish family listened to the conversations of the visitors and became part of the larger world of politics. Yeah, just to remind you, they didn't have Google, they didn't have internet. Yeah, you might wonder why, but they didn't. A place where wine went and the secrets came out, the tavern was what in the Judaic mystical tradition is called a revealer of secrets. Jews needed neither yellow press nor mystery novels. They had the tavern. They had no desire to part with it, although envy and xenophobia led to spread calumny against Jewish tavern keepers. And again, one of the most important calumnies was the Jews sell bad quality vodka and they make Russian peasants drunk or Slavic peasants drunk. Accusations against tavern keepers selling low quality liquor made the business unrewarding. Russian contemporaries bemoaned the low quality of vodka of the liquor monopolists, but not of tavern keepers, who were interested above all in a quick return. They were notorious for diluting vodka, not distilling it properly, and destroying the market for cheaper port and beers. While this happened mostly outside of the Pale of Jewish settlement, there's 15 provinces in the western part of the Russian Empire where Jews were legally allowed to settle starting from the 1770s. The wholesalers in the shtetls were not much better. In the shtetls, however, some minimal quality had to be maintained because of the competition, the leaseholder of the landlord's tavern. The constant threat from the much better protected wholesalers left the private tavern keepers with only one option: to sell a quality product. Good vodka helped outdo the calumnies. I would like to look at the case of Moshka Telezhenetsky, a tavern keeper from Shepetovka, in a revealing number of ways. In 1836, Dr. Kirichenko, of Polish origin, of Zaslav, today Izaslav, accused Moshka of poisoning the peasants, and the clerks on the Volhynia Province Commission rigorously investigated the charges, which were serious: homicide. The investigation found that the deacon of the village church in the outskirts of Shepetovka decided to drink in honor of his deceased relatives. He came to Moshka Telezhenetsky and purchased 7 buckets of vodka. It's about 20 gallons. The next day, he invited the clergy and peasants from his parish to join him. I really liked working with police documents. They tell you such a geschmack detail. They started around 10 a.m., so that's the time when you start drinking vodka, in the outskirts of Shepetovka, and stayed until 3 p.m., finishing 2 buckets of alcohol, so 24 liters. Mikhail Andreev, now we're coming to sad things. Mikhail Andreev, a peasant prone to drunkenness, liked free vodka. He barely made it home. A few hours later, he was not feeling well, and by the evening, his condition worsened. The next day, he was dead. Dr. Kirichenko of Zaslav managed to see Andreev still alive and later came to testify his death. Kirichenko wrote a diagnosis along with some nasty xenophobic comments and dispatched all of that to Zhytomyr, provincial center. Peasant Mikhail Andreev, he wrote, died from vodka bought in Shepetovka from a local Jewish tavern belonging to Moshka Telezhenetsky, end quote. Provincial authorities jumped on the case. Too many peasants had been at the party. Besides, a few years before, a Jew had been suspected of ritual murder in nearby Zaslav. If Telezhenetsky was guilty, they would have an excellent explanation of why the peasants' mortality rate, for the peasants' mortality rate, other than the serfdom, of course. The Zhytomyr police sent orders to Shepetovka, arrest the tavern keeper and conduct a search of the tavern. The police discovered 4 things they seemed suspicious. They opened a chest and found some strange white powder. In the kitchen, they spotted some herbs of unknown provenance. From Telezhenetsky's purse, they pulled a strange note with Jewish inscriptions, which they identified quite correctly, as Kabbalistic. These three things I discuss in other chapters of the book. Here I'm interested in the fourth thing they found. And finally, the vodka. 3 barrels sealed by the leaseholder's stamp. They filled a bottle of vodka from one of the barrels and sent all 4 items, vodka, herbs, the note, and the powder, to Zhytomyr for investigation. The case seemed promising. This Moshka was obviously a necromancer out to poison the Russian Orthodox clergy and peasants. The Volhynia Province Commission contacted local chemists who tested Telezhenetsky vodka and, to the Commission's dismay, discovered, quote, no narcotic, mineral or metallic ingredients, unquote. I was amazed when I was reading that because, to find out that they have in 1836 a chemical lab in Zhytomyr is just one thing. To find out that they are saying нет наркотических, минеральных и железных ингредиентов. That it's in Russian language. That was really, to see that they are bothering themselves to look into all these things and test them. It's quite remarkable. So I started to think quite highly about Zhytomyr. They not only found it absolutely harmless, but added that it was of good quality. So we know what they did with it. The result, the police released Telezhenetsky and accused the doctor of poor care and behavior. Of course, no matter what the quality, vodka prices were low, but the tensions they triggered very high. Unlike the treasury tavern keepers, the gentry tavern leaseholders didn't have to make special duty payments. Furthermore, the landlords allowed other shtetl dwellers to retail liquor from their cellars. In towns shared by the Russian state treasury and the Polish gentry, the Russian liquor monopoly clashed with the Polish leaseholding. Let me step aside and tell you what is going on. Starting from the 1770s, Catherine the Great and consecutive Russian czars were trying to get the shtetls from out of the Polish magnates. In other parts of the book, I discuss what the shtetl was in the times when I look at it during the so-called Golden Age. And I'm saying that we are having a very interesting situation. We have a triangle of power in the shtetl in that particular period, the 1770s, the 1850s. Before the 1770s, you have who in the shtetls? Mostly Poles and Jews. Predominantly Poles and Jews. Who do you have after the 1840s? Predominantly Russians and Jews. But in that particular period, you have 3 powers. You have Poles, who are still the magnates. They still own the towns. You have Jews, who are, of course, the people who run the economy, who run the trade, and the Russian administration. It's interesting that the shtetl stands on the Russian land, is owned by a Polish noble, and has a trade conducted mostly by Jews. You do not have that before the 1770s. You do not have that after the 1840s. Another thing which is of interest for us here is that trying to kick the Poles out of the ownership of the towns on these territories that Russia captured from Poland late in the 18th century, the Russians sometimes created artificial situation when all these Radzivills, Sapiegas, Brunitskis, Czartoryskis, Ganskis, and so on and so forth became bankrupt, and they had to sell parts of the town. Now imagine you have one part of the town that is owned by the Russian treasury, that is to say by the Russian crown, and pays taxes directly to the Russian crown, and another part of the town which is still owned by a magnate. Right? Russians sell the privilege to produce and sell liquor to their monopolists who control prices in that part of the town, but Poles give this retail opportunities to many different tavern keepers. Russians want their price to be very high, but if you just walk 5 steps across the street to the part of the town which is owned by a magnate, you can get into, well, not very nice tavern, but the price there will be lower and the quality of vodka will be higher. Of course, Russians realize they are losing excise taxes, they are losing and the monopolists are losing money that they invested into their monopoly, whereas the competition makes their life really bitter in the shtetls. That is what triggers what I call vodka wars. Only out for themselves, the liquor monopolists brutally suppressed individual brewers and aggressively took over their assets. Like Jewish liquor leaseholders, the liquor monopolists introduced fixed prices, and fixed meant high. With a monopoly of the market, the liquor monopolists cared little about the quality of their wine and vodka. Their own concern was quantity. Tens of millions of rubles in state revenues were at stake. The Tsars mobilized state institutions to protect the monopolists from interlopers. Alexander I and Nicholas I allowed the liquor monopolists to use the army to protect their trade. Clandestine bartenders, brewers, and tavern keepers undermining the local monopoly were brutally suppressed. Armed guards prevented residents and travelers from bringing liquor purchased elsewhere into the towns. Outside the Pale of Settlement, the guards protected entire cities from vodka smugglers, while inside the Pale of Settlement, they controlled the entrances to the shtetls and villages. The disparity in prices turned competition between the state liquor monopolists and the magnates, tavern keepers into a vodka war. Jews involved in the liquor business found themselves in two belligerent camps. The vodka wars involved everybody: Polish magnates, governors, the ministers, the Senate, the Tsar, Ukrainians, Russians, and ordinary Jews. With varying intensity, this war played out almost in every shtetl. I will take one example to show you what vodka wars means for people who dwell in town. I'll take Berdichev. Berdichev, of course, for us is today the middle of nowhere, but I just want to reassure you that in the late 18th, early 19th century, Berdichev was as important to the Russian Empire as Frankfurt and Leipzig were for Prussia. Berdichev Jews started their vodka war with the cherem, Hebrew for the ban of excommunication. This ban of excommunication appeared on the doors of the Great Synagogue and outlawed any alcohol made in Berdichev. Berdichev townsfolk could hardly survive Shabbat without a shot of brandy. They found it excruciating to have to refuse liquor available in any local pub and needed an extraordinary incentive to make the boycott work. The entire Jewish population took part in the boycott. Nobody wanted to pay an exorbitant sum for a bottle of wine or a shtoff of vodka. In addition to economics, religious arguments also play a role. Rubinstein, the leaseholder of the local liquor trade, the monopolist, had converted to Christianity. As a Christian supervisor of the production of Jewish liquor, he dismissed Judaic dietary stringency, not always applicable to brandy, but always obligatory for wine made from grapes. For this and other reasons, the Jews of Berdichev committed themselves to the ban. They allowed themselves the dispensation of consuming outside vodka if they could get it out of town. Rubinstein could not contain his anger. In a short period of time, he lost 10,000 silver rubles in duties. He complained to everyone: the Senate, the Governor General in Kiev, the police chief in Zhytomyr, and the town owner of Berdichev. He convinced Prince Radziwill to make a complaint too. Radziwill appealed to the bias of the Russian statesman. Jews, he said, had used their religious laws to harm the loyal owner of the town. Radziwill's claims might have touched on a sensitive issue, yet Rubinstein knew that Russian government was often unable to exercise its power. The only power that could crack down on Jewish resistance, Rubinstein decided, was that of religion. An apostate himself, he turned to Mordechai Tversky, a Hasidic master of enormous clout, and pleaded with him to persuade the Jews to cancel the ban. We have the police to thank for recording that these two really had a meeting, most likely a very brief one, because Mordechai Tversky sent Rubinstein туди, куди Макар телят не ганяв. Very far. Berdychev was too important a town for the Russian authorities to feign neutrality. Grudgingly, they had to intervene. They decided that the town tavern keepers should recompense Rubinstein 15,000 rubles. Then they ordered an investigation and arrested the alleged group who had set the ban, of course, local tavern keepers who were not part of the monopoly. 3 respectable town merchants, Adam Brodetsky, Shtetl Berlinburg, and Moshko Warszawski, were thrown into a detention cell. The detainees dispatched a protest from prison to the investigator, insisting that they knew nothing about the boycott. Puzzled, a government detective turned to people in the streets. So Zhytomyr and then St. Petersburg sent a person to Berdychev to find out what is going on. Local vodka, Ukrainian and Russian dwellers in town replied, was much too expensive. In violation of state regulatory politics, Rubinstein had shamelessly raised prices. In addition, he sold vodka by the Polish quart, which was smaller than the Russian quart, but priced it higher than the Russian measure. Russians reported that the Jews threatened to stop drinking vodka for 1 year, horrible thing, unless it cost 20 kopecks a quart. Catholics claimed to have heard Jews saying that they would never drink the vodka of this vile convert Rubinstein, whatever the price. But these were just rumors. The Zhytomyr magistrate could not prove the guilt of the detained Jews and transferred the case to the Volhynia court, then to the Senate. Meanwhile, the flow of vodka in Berdychev miraculously stopped. Rubinstein realized that the Senate could rule in favor of the townsfolk and against the Polish magnate and his monopoly, which he needed to prevent at all cost. Rubinstein harnessed his horses and rushed to St. Petersburg. There he shoved bribes at several statesmen and made sure they would approve a decision favoring him and not the town dwellers. He succeeded, and on his return tripled his grip on liquor sales. Still, he acquiesced to the popular protest and fixed the price in the amount of 20 kopecks per quart of wine. Rubinstein also made some harsh decisions. He decided to establish boom barriers around the town so that nobody would be able to bring vodka from elsewhere to town. So you cannot go out of town, buy vodka and bring it home and drink it there, because Rubinstein's guards will take a vodka from you and you will have to pay excise tax for smuggling vodka in town. He had his mounted guards controlling checkpoints and road boom barriers. Do whatever you deem necessary, he said, but protect my monopoly. Berdychev turned into what a contemporary called a serf town. Radziwill was the alcohol king, Rubinstein the liquor minister, and ordinary townsfolk, Jews, Slavs, liquor serfs. The guards went so far as to stop governmental envoys carrying mail through Berdychev. The mailman resisted. The guards pulled swords to make them obey and check their mail bags. You deny us an affordable shot of vodka, Jews would say, we will smuggle. Borach and Shlomo were extraordinarily resourceful. They purchased special governmental mail bags, commissioned uniforms, and hired certain Leib Prilutsky to be in charge of mail transfer. They looked like normal Jews leasing Russian post services and driving express mail through Berdychev. The difference between them and genuine Jewish postmasters was the quality of their mail. It was liquid and measured in buckets. They could carry about 800 buckets of express mail at a time. Rubinstein himself beat up Prilutsky when he discovered the fraud, and he had the authorities forbid the smuggling of vodka under penalty of law. Popular protests, however, continued for years. Jews would leave Berdychev before the sun set for out-of-town taverns and came back at night with a bottle of vodka sticking from out of every pocket. Some went individually trying to circumvent the checkposts on the way back. Others returned in crowds to confront the guards and break through, beating them, just for the sake of free and cheap vodka. Of course, the Russians didn't like the situation, and throughout the 19th century they were trying to squeeze Jews out of liquor trade. I can tell you a long story how they managed to do that. It occupies 5 pages, 3 pages in the book. The point was, of course, that Russians realized if they take vodka from out of Jews, they are not doing something against the Jews. They are, of course, undermining the economy of the magnates. So what Jewish historians, my colleagues, consider the anti-Semitic actions of the Russian government was something very simple and pragmatic. They wanted to undermine the economy of the magnates, taking slowly the shtetls, these private towns, from under the Polish ownership. By the end of the 19th century, Russians managed to banish all the Jews from liquor trade, and in the mid-1890s they introduced state monopoly on liquor trade. So Jews were absolutely forbidden to be tavern keepers, to brew wines and brandies, and to sell even through their Christian proxies in any part of the Pale of Settlement. That was, of course, devastating not only toward the Polish szlachta, Polish nobility, but also it was a devastating moment for the Jews. But for us, it is important to realize that once the Russian authorities really managed to introduce state monopoly, that meant that instead of 10 taverns in a town, you would have one. Instead of 1 tavern in a village, you would have 10 villages with 1 tavern for all of them. If you think this is a good thing, I will need to refer you to the writings of Ivan Funduklei, the professor of economics of Kiev University in the 1840s, 1860s, a very important Russian scholar of economics. Just to remind you, what today is in Kiev Khmelnytsky Street and what it had been Lenin Street in the Soviet times was the Funduklei Street in the Tsarist Russia before 1917. So Funduklei is a very important scholar, and he loves statistics, he loves quantitative history. Funduklei wrote a very important study of the where he compared drunkenness and ratio of drunkards to general population, male general population, among Christians and among Jews in the Pale of Settlement and outside of the Pale of Settlement. And he realized that when you have less taverns and higher prices, people drink more. It is, again, not something that I can explain. I'm not an economic historian, but it makes sense. So the introduction of state monopoly on vodka production and liquor trade in the late 19th century triggered the skyrocketing of drunkenness on the both sides of the Pale of Settlement, outside and within the Pale of Settlement. But what is interesting for us that Slavs and Jews retained that idea that if you do something in a clandestine manner, if you outwit the governmentally imposed monopolists who are trying to sell you diluted and very expensive vodka, you are doing something which is commensurable only with freedom. Samuil Marshak, a leading Russian children's poet, wrote an adult epigram on drinking. He wrote, "Here are some reasons to get drunk. A divorce, a funeral, a wedding, a departure, a success, an award, a promotion, and simply getting drunk for no reason. И просто пьянство без причин. Drinking for its own sake takes Slavs away from the controlled realm of the officialdom with its imposed festivals and ideology. It also frees the Slavs and Jews from poverty and distress. A Ukrainian female peasant song praises vodka as nourishing as porridge. Hey, горілка, біла-біла, я б тебе ложкою їла. Hey, vodka, very white, I would eat you with a spoon. A Ukrainian folk song has its rebel peasants calling for pouring vodka over the rim so that life in the world will be better. Alec the Mechanic, a tailor from a short story by Sholem Aleichem, stayed sober all year round since he could not afford brandy. But on Simchat Torah, the day when the annual cycle of Torah reading is completed, he would reward himself for his enforced sobriety. Sholem Aleichem wondered how such a small man can pour so much liquor into himself. Drinking for the sake of rejoicing became so widespread at the Hasidic courts that Solomon Schechter, in his Vienna years, concocted a Hebrew parody. Solomon Schechter, of course, is this father-founder of the Schechter Jewish schools that are well known in the United States and perhaps also in Canada. His main character, a novice, spends days learning how to drink without measure for its own sake and feels it incumbent to drink with every effort I can make until I fall down wherever I sit, so that no one, God forbid, suspects me of not being an accomplished Chassid. Adam Mickiewicz's Poles went to relax after Mass to a Jewish tavern. Z kaplicy, że była niedziela, zabawić się I wypić przyszli do Jankiela. After church, since it was Sunday, they went to have fun and drink at Yankel's. They had fun in the Jewish tavern. Of course, they had little fun, if any fun, in the church, if you understand correctly, Mickiewicz. Drinking as a path toward personal freedom permeated East European culture from the top down. Though drinking contributed to the state treasury, it also changed state ideology. Открывайте погреба, гуляет нынче голодьба. Open the cellars, the mob is having fun today, wrote Alexander Blok about the inebriating 1917 revolution. To drink whatever one wants and whenever one wants became an act of defiance. We could drink no more, a Russian poet ironically swears, but we could drink no less. The revolutionary Vladimir Mayakovsky described the netherworld with the scornful word temperance, трезвость, in his poem about Yesenin. In his canonic poem, A Confession, Czeslaw Milosz ironically questioned his own status as a prophetic figure in Poland and elsewhere, since he indulged in the only too human, well-chilled vodka, herring in olive oil. The main character in one of the most subversive Russian novels, Moscow to the End of the Line, by Venedikt Yerofeev, drinks rose wine, lotion, eau de toilette, and cologne, and in complete delirium derides communism, the Slavic soul, and Russian chauvinism. Ready to drink his glass straight down, he pronounces, "Share with me my repast, O Lord." An important Russian satirist, Igor Guberman, exclaimed, "A tavern, a brothel, a pub, a bar, may our feast be blessed amid the fumes of divine grace." However, East European tradition joined together not only drinking and freedom, but drinking and creativity. It makes perfect sense that Mikhail Bakhtin, a leading Russian 20th century thinker, saw Rabelaisian excessive drunkenness through the East European lens as a popular expression of freedom. The Russian proverb puts it best. С утра выпил, целый день свободен. Have a drink in the morning and you will be free all the day. L'chaim. I will be happy to answer your questions, but please let me remind you something that I need to remind my audiences. I teach adult audiences in the United States, mostly in the United States, for the last 16 years, and usually when it comes to questions and answers, I say, I accept questions, I do not accept statements. I hope you understand what I mean. Okay? Go ahead, please. Please.
Thank you very much for your lecture. So I was thinking about two things, keeping in mind the Brida Mashpa from Karanovich. He's, of course, in the 20th century, and he's describing the awful social situation in the shtetl. And on the other hand, we have Franco, with his, I think it was written originally in German language, about the propination and the law on the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, especially in Galicia. Did you not overcome about any sources complaining about the deteriorating social situation in this area because of the alcohol? you were more or less referring to the political influence and to the ideas of power and getting taxes from the center. On the other side, you have a tremendous loss, at least we know from Galicia, of working power because of this being constantly alcoholized in these taverns, where you could not eat anything usually. There were just breweries and other things you could consume.
This is an interesting point. Of course, we need to compare what is going on in the Austrian Kresy, so to say, in the Austrian part of Ukrainian territory to what is going on in the central Ukraine. I haven't found any sources that would connect the decline of the shtetl to the increased drunkenness. Vice versa, I see sources that say once taverns are taken by the government from the Jews, that creates the decline of the shtetl, and that is increasing the poverty of the shtetl and increases the economic downfall. That is quite clear from the documents throughout the second half of the 19th century. As far as the Galician territory goes, my colleague from Sarah Lawrence College in New York, Glenn Diner, published a book just about that. He looks mostly on Poland. He looks mostly at Poland and at Polish tavern keeping, discusses it from the perspective of a social historian in a book published by Oxford University Press last November. It's called Yankel's Tavern, and it is a very thorough discussion of the impact and the impact of and the perception of the taverns in Polish Jewish culture. He also doesn't see that particular impact of drunkenness on the mortality rate. I do not see that in his book, and he spent the entire book talking just about that. I have only one chapter in the book about that. He has the entire book. So I would say this. To a great extent, we are dealing with myths created by great literati, by great literary men. And most of these literary men were enlightened scholars, enlightened thinkers. And from their perspective, any tavern, any inn, any shinnik is a bad thing. Why people go to the tavern? Let them go to Prosvita Society and read Ukrainian books. I cannot argue against this argument. It's a good argument. But I'm saying that many of the perceived ideas that shape our mentality and prompt us how to think about these things are coming not from the socio-historical studies, but mostly from the literary studies. You mentioned basically two writers, right? And I'm saying writers tell us how people remember things. Let's try to look at how things really were. When I was working on the book, the draft title for the book was The Shtetl as It Was. I'm not trying to invent things. I'm trying to tell you the story as it really was. I hope I'm, so to say, addressing your question. Go ahead, please.
I'm curious, and the same question from a different perspective. The tavern keepers are making money. What do they do with the money? Do they help publish books? Do they support the cultural life of their community?
Tavern keepers in the community are not loved by the community. Let me start with this. Jewish tavern keepers are not loved not only by Slavs, they are not loved by the Jews. Tavern keeping is a difficult job. Tavern keepers usually live 3-4 families in one big tavern because they have to attend to the customers, they sell things, they have grocery store in tavern, they cook. I don't know any Jewish tavern that would not have some food provided in it. They have to pay humongous taxes to the landlords, to the Polish magnates. We should remember that the shtetl that I'm describing is still in private property of the landlord. Jews own nothing in the shtetl except their clothes. They do not own the taverns. Taverns belong to the magnates. And all the utensils in the tavern belong to magnates. The magnates lease the right to produce and sell alcohol to the Jews, which means Jews have to pay upfront to the magnate a certain amount of money and have to recompense themselves really working hard in the taverns to cover what they paid. Next year comes, the magnate increases the sum. In addition to that particular sum that they pay upfront, they have to pay taxes at the end of the year. So they are double taxed all the time, and magnates get their 65 to 80% of the income from the taverns because look how tavern keepers look like. They are not the wealthiest people in the shtetl. They are not as poor as artisans, but they are not as wealthy as merchants. Okay, so the image of the tavern keeper who is producing money should not obfuscate the fact that this money is poured into the pockets of the magnate. Now, we do know, on the other hand, that tavern keepers are contributing to the development of local Jewish culture. The tavern keepers are participating on a par with wealthy merchants and with wealthy artisans, especially members of the guilds. Jewish guilds exist on a par with Christian guilds. Two different cases. I describe the territory and the time period when you have 20 new printing presses emerging at that time in the shtetl. You have two printing presses before the 1770s, two printing presses after the 1840s, but you have 20 in that particular period of time. A printing press is an expensive enterprise. Tavern keepers, merchants, artisans contribute to the book publication industry, and they purchase what they call prenumerantin. That is to say, the books that are subscribers, yeah, thank you, to the subscribers. So I cannot give you exact examples, but I do see tavern keepers who are among the names of the subscribers to major Hasidic, Kabbalistic books and books of Jewish learning that are produced at that particular time.
But they're not the major mecenate of this beautiful.
No, they cannot. They cannot be. They cannot be. They also contribute to the synagogues. You know, you have beautiful synagogues built at that time. You know, people tell me, oh, this shtetls, they are, you know, Jewish villages in the middle of nowhere where nothing happens by pogroms, you know, and you have this kerosene store on a dirty, muddy street. That's what people think about the shtetls. And then I open my photos and I see this beautiful, humongous, fantastic synagogues built in this middle of nowhere in the late 18th, early 19th century. Where do they get money? Russian Tsar gives the money? Of course, no. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was wondering about kashrut. Once
There is a dietary laws.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
So once the Jewish taverns were suppressed in the 1890s, how do Jews drink kosher wine, kosher brandy?
You know what? Let me remind everybody that anything produced from grain is kosher 354 days a year. That is except Passover, right? For Passover, Jews use pesachuvka, that is vodka made of potatoes. All other brandies, all other liquors, all other wines, Jews sell, and whether they drink it or not, we have very little evidence. They did not tell me. But it's quite interesting that Jews are very often engaged not only in locally producing and selling wine in taverns, but they also go as far as Hungary to purchase, especially in Galicia, to purchase wines there, bring them back to Lemberg, Lviv, Lvov, and sell to the local magnates, to sell to the local Polish noblemen, and to the monasteries. And from what I know, I can tell you that those Jews who are engaged in this particular business do not consider drinking non-kosher wines a major transgression. Let me put it this way, okay? That is to say, we have, for example, a very interesting person whose name is Ber of Bolihov, who is, of course, from the town of Bolihov. His real name is Birkenthal. He left for us a wonderful, extremely dull, but really wonderful memoir, self-narrative, it's not really autobiography, in which he says how he took his brother and they went to that particular group of villages in Hungary to purchase Tokai wines. And his brother bought acid Tokai wines, but he bought really sweet Tokai wines. Excuse me, these Tokai wines are produced by Hungarian peasants who are non-Jews, right? And for the Jew, just for everybody to understand, to drink wine produced by non-Jews is forbidden. If you are participating in gathering grapes and in handling the press, it becomes kosher, right? But it becomes so fit in the dietary laws, dietary requirements. But this particular Birkenthal goes to Hungarian villages, tastes these wines, and says, "Oh, I bought better wines than my brother." And he all the time brags how he is praised by the monks in Uniat, Catholic and Eastern Orthodox monasteries throughout Galicia because he brings them very, very high quality wines. So how does he know that unless he drinks it, or unless he at least tastes that? So I believe.
And once the Jewish taverns are suppressed, what happens then?
Jews move from vodka from wines to vodka. They drink only what burns. Yeah, go ahead, please. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just curious, is there any connection between the pogroms and the Russian desire to have higher taxes from the taverns? Any relation there in the end?
The question is about the connection between pogroms, mass violence against Jews, let's say 1880 area that I'm discussing. 3 provinces would have 2 pogroms, one in Balta, in Podolia, in southwestern Podolia, and one in Kiev. All other shtetl do not see the pogroms at that particular time. Just none, nil. All the pogroms are in Katerinoslav, Kherson province, that is to say, economically vibrant, very rapidly developing industrial centers in what today is southeastern Ukraine. Go ahead, please.
I read a book, I read a review of a book that came out within the last few years. The author, I forget the name and the title, but he maintained that within the Russian Empire, the government relied very heavily on income from liquor or alcohol to finance wars, because Russia basically was always at war during that period. And that whenever a temperance movement would arise somewhere, that the government would clamp down on it and, in fact, punish the leaders of the temperance movement because this hurt their business. Are you familiar with that aspect of it? And one other thing, you never mentioned the word samohon anywhere. Was there samohon at that time?
Yeah. Let me start with the last, because it is something very familiar and dear to my heart. What I call brandy, you call samohon. I cannot use the word samohon in the book, because then you would have 3 readers of the book, you, me, and Roman, right? Who would understand what it's all about. I use the word brandy. Brandy is not the word used in any locality anywhere in the Pale of Settlement or outside in the 19th, 20th century. They use samohon. Samogonka in Russian, samohon in Ukrainian. Brandy would be the closest version of it, right? Homemade vodka. Let me get back to your first part, to the first part of the question. Please find out the author of the book and send him to me to take a seminar in Russian 19th century history. If this book is written as a course paper, as a coursework for my course, I would give this paper C+, maximum C++, not more than that. Why so? Because the temperance movement in Russia is initiated by the Tsarina and is supported by her entire coterie. So you have the entire court supporting the idea of temperance movement, including the Russian Tsars, Alexander III and Nicholas II. They are very much in favor of the temperance movement. So to say that the Russian Tsars are against it is to say something which is just bluntly against the facts on the ground. However, and I'm pointing to what I'm going to say in the book, the Russian Tsars have to deal with pragmatic reasoning. They might be ideologically driven, they might have all sorts of ideas, but they know that in 1897, 25% of the Russian state budget is generated by the alcohol, by the vodka production. Okay? And of course, they cannot make the propaganda, they don't use the word, but we can use the word, propaganda of the temperance movement very spread and supported throughout Russia, because they would be, shooting their own foot. It's not practical to get rid of the 25% of the budget. To say that they use this money for the military, for the wars, is also not accurate. When money comes into the state budget and is part of the state treasury, how do you know that that particular part of the budget goes for the war? It doesn't work that way. You have other 75%. Why don't you say that perhaps from that 75% they finance wars? That's not how the state budget operates. Of course, let me remind you, this 25% is a very important part of the budget. And of course, we know that Russia is at war in 1805, 1806, in 1812, against France, 1813 up to 1816 when they feed their horses in the Seine. 1830 when they are suppressing the Polish rebellion, 1848 when they're suppressing Krakow rebellion, 1855, Crimean, 54-55, the Crimean War, 1877, Russian war for the liberation of Slavs, so to say, in the Balkans, 1905, 1905, 1904, 1905, the war against Japan. So Russia is at war all the time. But Russia has other paragraphs of the budget to sponsor its military activities, not necessarily vodka. To make this particular connection is an interesting thing to do, but the proof is the burden on the writer, on the author of the book. Go ahead, please.
I'm interested in the tavern as a site of gustatory delights.
Uh-huh.
You sort of said something, so I understand there's good quality vodka, there's some Yohanan there. But what you said that they made their own wine in the bitches, or where did they get the grapes? Did they have beer? What did they eat? What were the snacks? Can you tell us anything?
Right. In order to, since there are many taverns in a town, not one, not two, not three, taverns serve not only as a place where you can drink and do other things that I mentioned, not only as a grocery store, not only as a storage for goods, not only as a storage for things that they will be selling during the annual fairs, not only as bread and breakfast, you can actually stay there. They serve also as this moment of, as this institution of social entertainment. They bring wines from elsewhere. They have their own grapes. They bring grapes from Bessarabia, from Moldova, from the southern parts of Ukraine. But you do have Jews who produce different types of wines, also from apples, also from other fruits. You have fruktové vino, right? Fruit wines, all the time used, and it can be strawberry, it can be wild strawberry, it can be blueberry. They have all different types of wines, not necessarily made of grape, right? And it's very interesting to look at what they call in the magnate economy inventage, right? Inventories, registers of what is available in the tavern, especially when the Russian Commission comes to a tavern and really inspects what is there, and they create the list, and they put this list into a police case or whatever court case, and then I have an opportunity to see what is available there. You know, you can close any bar in the neighborhood of the university in Edmonton and open this tavern, you would not lose anything. They would even have what they call French vodkas, meaning champagne, brought from Paris through Leipzig, through Brody to Berdichev. So you have enormous amount of varieties of different wines, right? So not necessarily grape wines. To allow myself a personal insight, the maiden name of my paternal grandmother is Vinokur, right? So the person who kurit vino, that is to say, in the 19th century Russian language, Slavic language, it means the person who produces different types of wines. I believe I'm answering your question.
You didn't say anything about food.
Oh, food, sorry, food. In most cases, if not in all, bartenders in taverns are female. And they are also responsible for feeding people who are coming there to eat. Of course, they produce mostly kosher food. They do not feed you lard there. It is not available in a Jewish tavern. That is inconceivable in the Jewish tavern. But they would have all sorts of foods that Jews make. And that is an important moment when Jews learn to make Slavic foods à la juif, so to say, in a Jewish manner. And I also have somewhere in the book lengthy anthropological discussions where I show how Jews appropriated all these foods that they consider today 100% Slavic, 100% Jewish, but they are of course Slavic. You know, you come to any kosher store and you would have big cans with the word borscht written on it. Yeah, and Jews say, oh, of course, it's a Jewish food. Oh, thank you, be my guest, right? Or they would have pickles, and they would have, kosher ohirkes, you know, which of course is also of Ukrainian origin. Or they would have kasha, that they think is a typical sabbatical food for Shabbat, produced by Jews. If you tell them that this is buckwheat eaten by Slavic inhabitants of the shtetl, they will be offended. And I offend them in that particular way. Okay, so again, many types of Slavic food without typical ingredients that would deem this food non-kosher for the Jews. Go ahead, please. Yeah. Heather.
I had a question that leads on perfectly from John Paul's. He asked about what people ate and drank there, and I'm interested in this as a site of sociability. It's funny because I work on Kiev province from the point of view of the Orthodox priests in the region, and so I've read a lot of memoirs and a lot of his period, and I feel stupid, but I kind of always thought of the taverns as being these places where Jews served and Ukrainians drank, and I forgot that Jews would drink in them too. Because
Sorry.
You're reading those, you're reading the memoirs from that side. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about taverns as a place where Jews and Ukrainians meet, because even if there's not very many ethnic Ukrainians living in a shtetl, they're coming on market day, and
of course.
one of the things they do is go to the tavern. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Right. The tavern is a major locus of encounter of Slavs and Jews. No doubt about that. I find amazing examples of what actually happens there. In other chapters of the book, I discuss Poles and Jews in the taverns. I discuss a Polish violinist who comes to a tavern to perform at the Purim, to perform at one of the festival days of the Jewish calendar. Russian officers, wealthy Ukrainian peasants come to tavern on a regular basis. I just wanted to remind you that we think of a shtetl as of a place where only Polish odnodvorcy, that is to say, impoverished szlachta, live, and Jews and Russian administrators. That's not exactly so, because starting from the early 19th century, there is quite an amount of Ukrainian peasants who become state peasants. Yeah, and that is to say, they are purchased by state from the landlords, and they are allowed to settle in towns. So in practically any shtetl, the outskirts of the shtetl, you would have peasants' huts. And these peasants do not have a privilege of producing alcohol or of managing taverns. They go to a Jewish tavern. So I believe that that is exactly the place where the Yiddish conversation becomes peppered with the Slavic words of Ukrainian, of Polish, but mostly of Ukrainian origin. I have the lists of these words in the book. I'm trying to tell it as a narrative. I don't want to create a sociolinguistic treatise, but of course I'm showing what particular words and expressions from Ukrainian permeate Yiddish spoken language. That happens not only in the marketplace, where mostly women trade, but of course in the tavern, where Jews come to drink and where peasants come to drink too. Just to remind you that drunkards are rare among the Jews, but to have a good drink over Sabbath is something that is almost a must for a Jew. I cannot imagine my Sabbath without a single malt, and I'm sure I'm inheriting those Jews who could not imagine Sabbath without samohonka. Just 2 shots, but still. Go ahead, please.
My question is born from reading literature, and I'm wondering this. How would a peasant pay for his drink? Would it be in cash? Would it be with an IOU? Would he barter a coat, a shirt, whatever? And are there any records showing these kinds of relationships? And also, the flip side of this, did tavern at any time serve also as money lenders? Let's say, if they made a lot of cash, would they lend money back, let's say, to peasants or to other people in the shtetl?
Let me start with the last point you're making. Money lending is absolutely not a typical Jewish business in the shtetls. Jews have very little money, and the little money they have, they contribute to the so-called gmach, Gmilut Chasadim, which is a volunteer society that we can call today free loan society. That is something that allows impoverished Jews, the Jews who come to start their business, in order to get startup money, they go to this gemach, to this free loan society, to get money from there, start business, and then return it. It's a very important arrangement that doesn't allow Jews to amass money, but allows others to partake to it and to have this ongoing, operating social relief fund. I do not find the story that we do find in literature that often. In literature, we find the stories that peasants come to the Jewish taverns, Jews sell them liquor for credit, right? That's how we say, yeah. And peasants become more and more embedded to the more and more indebted to the Jews, and the Jews will then purchase their grain, their livestock, and you would have entire villages owing to the Jews. That is a story that you find mostly in late 19th century Russian literature. There are some cases when it is also in Ukrainian literature, but my question is, do we have Ukrainian writers borrowing from the Russian brethren? Or they have observed these kind of things on their own? I'm not a specialist in that particular field. I would like to ask you as a specialist in that field. Maybe you can answer. But cases where the entire village would owe money to a Jew, to a tavern keeper, because he was selling vodka for credit, I have not seen. That particular case would be momentarily reflected in Russian court documents. I claim to have seen at least 10,000 court cases and documents of court cases for Volhynia, Podylia, and Kiev provinces, anywhere from the 1780s throughout the 1860s. I haven't seen a single case of that particular format that would tell me that that was the case. So again, literary and memoir texts are wonderful. They really shape our memories, but do we have proof from social history? Please, Natalia.
I want to continue on the convivium modality of the conversation. First of all, music as entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of music? And secondly, gender relations. Do we have only male clients and female servers, or are there any female clients? And if so, what is the convivium like on the inter-ethnic and interreligious level? Humans are, after all, humans.
Right, right. Is it possible to switch on my PowerPoint? You know what, while I'll be answering questions, I have a couple of pictures to show you. They are from a different lecture. I don't want to make it very long. I hope people will be able to look at the book and if they want to take one. But
It'll take time to warm.
it'll take time. Okay, you know what? Let's not do that. I wanted to show you pictures made by Polish painters in the 19th century Shtetl. You have female and male bartenders. You have female and male Poles and Ukrainians and Russians in the tavern. So these are very vivid pictures made by professional painters, not from memory, but mostly people who visited these taverns in Poland, in Galicia, in what is now Ukraine. Why I am saying that women were bartenders? Because when you have a tavern serving also as an inn, especially drive-in, right? Drive-in. Somebody has to unload the wagon. You have gates. The wagon comes with horses, is brought into the tavern. Somebody has to take care of the people there and unharness horses, and attend to that part of the business. That is done by men. Men feed horses. Men help to accommodate those who come to stay at the tavern. Women are the bar. Do we have cases of sexual harassment in taverns? Yes. And quite often. But Jewish male harassing Jewish female. I do not see in the court cases any kind of cases where you would have Slavs harassing Jewish women. Sorry, that's what I have. But there is quite abundant literature called rabbinic responsa of male Jews, complaints of male Jews who either raped or attempted to rape female tavern keepers in different taverns. Tavern is, again, not only this place of entertainment, music, so on and so forth, food, but also it's a dangerous place because it is a place of entertainment. Going back to music, yes, I do have records of all sorts of types of entertainment, weddings celebrated in taverns, violin heard in taverns, what we call today klezmer groups. They had no klezmer groups, but this kind of musical groups were very often seen in taverns. That's what they would be. They do not have, other social clubs but those ones. Details, I would love to be able to provide details. We do not see that in the documents. We do not have Yiddish memoirs of that period of time. We don't have Hebrew memoirs of that period of time. So that is important to remind ourselves of. Most self-narratives created by Jewish and Hebrew writers come much later. Not from 1770 till 1840. Go ahead, please.
If I caught it correctly, you said that taverns didn't operate during Passover?
Taverns did operate during Passover. Taverns also operate during...
Holidays, were they...
Look, tavern operates 24/7. You cannot close the business. All sorts of tricks were invented. That's why I'm saying Jews did not like tavern keepers very much, because tavern keepers had to be cunning, inventing all sorts of things to operate the business when it is forbidden. So for high holidays, they would have Christian bartenders who would be like their proxies, who would be given orders what to do, how to do things. But over Shabbat, we know that from dozens of sources. The lady would say, put the money on the counter, and would move the money. Okay. Не виходить. В мене є адаптер. Тримайте.
Applied theology.
Pardon?
Applied theology.
Yeah, applied theology, right. There are all sorts of things you can, if you know the laws, you know how to circumvent them. But this circumventing was very often on the brink of violating the laws. But again, you have to operate the business. You have officers coming over Sabbath. You have Russian envoys. You have Italian diplomats. All sorts of people come from through this territory. Kiev, Volhynia, and Podila province are provinces that connect between Austria, Moscow, and St. Petersburg. Anybody who goes, you do not have a Boeing 747 that takes from Chicago to Edmonton. You have to go through this territory. So they have to attend to the clients. That's business. Go ahead, please, sir.
Say, to begin with, shalom.
Say apple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shalom. And I know it's a month ahead of time, but I wish you a happy Passover. I know it's
Thank you.
It's like wishing somebody Merry Christmas in October.
I accept that.
Thank you very much. I may sound loose. It seems that in any oppressive society, you've got to have an outlet for the masses. And so I would wonder if the magnates saw the shtetls serving liquor to the peasants was a way of keeping them under control so they wouldn't rebel. Also, is there anything in the Jewish literature that would indicate some of the violence and spousal abuse that occurred as a result of the overconsumption of liquor? And finally, you mentioned that you had printing presses and so forth. What was it that was printed? Was it shared with just among the Jews, or was it shared with, say, intellectuals from, say, Ukrainians and so forth? Or was this strictly within their own group? And is this where the expression, the Jews are the people of the book, comes from?
Well, the Jews are the people of many books, not of one book, as you can see looking at this table. Answering your third question, I would say chapter 10 of my book 40 pages, answers exactly that question. What they produced, why they produced what they produced, how they read, how they paid for the books, what was the circulation of the books, why certain books were sold with this circulation, other with a different circulation, and so on and so forth. Of course, book production was mainly a Jewish business, and they produced books in Hebrew and a little bit in Yiddish. So they did not, in most cases, but not in all, they did not produce books in Slavic languages. That was not done. You have to do proofreading, you have to do copy editing. That's not what Jews can do at that particular time. It would be done much later. It would be done later in Galicia when you have Jewish owners and Jewish proofreaders working with German books, and later, Diesa working with Russian books. But that is not the period I'm looking at. Okay. Getting back to your second question, chapter 7 in the book deals with violence. Yes, there are cases when inebriated, yes, you say in English, inebriated Jews would commit acts of violence. Some of them are extremely funny. Some of them are extremely offensive. These cases are recorded in Russian court cases. I really thank Russian police for monitoring these cases. You have quite abundant evidence about these particular cases in the shtetl. My particular approach to violence, whether it is done because the person committing violence is tipsy or not, is that violence in the shtetl is not a Christian violence, and is not a Polish violence, and is not a Ukrainian violence. Violence in the shtetl is nobody's violence. It is the equal opportunity violence. It is out there, available for everybody. You can curse, you can kick, you can spit, you can do whatever you want, and it is something that they all do, right? So the shtetl is a place of equal opportunity violence. That's also something very important. Getting back to your first question, peasants kept under control by landlords who are trying to make them drunk, giving them the outlet. You know, that particular approach is to be found in many sources. But you, I believe, think very highly about landlords. I believe you think that all the landlords think like 20th century sociologists who are sitting together. You know, I imagine this Czartoryski, Sapiega, Sieniawski, Brandeis, and they are saying, you know, folks, why don't we create these taverns and we make peasants drunk and they will drink and they would not rebel? Oh, good idea, you know, let's vote. You know, Polish magnates are not 20th century sociologists. They do not think that way. And I don't think that what is the situation on the ground is the result of their premeditated thinking and planning. No. It is important for them to make peasants go to towns and buy vodka from their leaseholding tavern keepers. Because this is the manner when the peasant brings geese to the marketplace, gets money, and then goes and gives this money back to the landlord purchasing vodka. That is very pragmatic financial economic interest of the magnates. To think that they will create an outlet for peasants, that's at best late 19th century sociology, not the magnate thinking. I believe I'm answering your 3 questions. Go ahead, Liz.
You mentioned the conflict between the Polish magnates and the government of Russia. When they took over Poland, why did they or why didn't they replace the Polish magnates with their own ability?
That is an excellent question. Chapter 1 of the book, 25 pages just on this question. And the point is very simple. Catherine the Great controls the territory. So you have first partition of Poland 1772, second 1793, third 1795. Russia captures 66% of Polish territory, inherits 1 million Jews. Catherine comes to this territory and finds out what? that there is something you do not see anywhere in Europe. Landlords in the interior Russia, let's say outside of these 15 provinces in the west, own villages. Landlords, magnates in Central Europe own villages. Magnates in these territories, in Poland, own towns. And Catherine, since she needs somehow to support herself, she cannot create immediately infrastructure, Russian infrastructure in this territory. She needs to rely on local power. Local power is the magnate. So she introduces in 1775 the law according to which all landlords in all, as she calls, newly acquired territories will retain their privileges. And she gets herself into a trap. Because on the one hand, she wants to get towns from the landlords. She wants to create their fortresses. She wants to have a Russian army there. She wants to have these towns that will be strongholds of the Russian presence, of the Russian administration, Russian court system, Russian treasury, so on and so forth. On the other hand, she already said that we Russian czars, retain or allow the landlords to retain their power, which means their patrimony, their ownership on towns. And that creates a tension that she cannot resolve. Paul I cannot resolve. Alexander I deals with, cannot resolve. Nicholas I deals with, cannot resolve. Only in the times of Alexander II, they found out how to deal with that. They ruined the patrimony of the magnates by bankrupting them, by creating, artificial bankruptcy and taking from them parts of towns. Then they liberated the peasants. That is a very important way. You think Russian great czars, liberated peasants. They wanted to undermine the economy of the Polish magnates. When you have no peasants, you're ruined, period. That's it. So, and if you look at when the towns are no more in private ownership, you will see that it is the 1860s, right? And there are two moments. First, of course, is the liberation of peasants in February 1861, and second, Polish rebellion of Polish Revolution of 1864, when Russians are saying, okay, enough of that. No Polish ownership on any towns in the Russian Empire. And they simply confiscate them. But the confiscation starts already in the 1770s. If you are known as the supporter of Polish rebellion of Kościuszko, let's say 1794, we will take your town from you because you are disloyal. And that particular approach is to be seen throughout the time. I'm giving more detail in the book about that. But that is a process that doesn't happen overnight. Okay, let me take the last question, folks. I'm really exhausted. I would like to start signing and selling the books if you want.
Just a very quick general question. A very dear friend of mine in Edmonton here is now passed away, Rabbi Louis Ginsburg. He and I had a very interesting discussion one night about Jewish achievement in various fields of endeavor. Mm-hmm. And he said, among the Jews, we are taught to read, to think, to question, and we even argue with our rabbis. And he says, among many other religions, it's pray, pay, and obey. What's your take on that?
When I come to teach any class, be it history of Ukraine, the Talmud, early modern Jewish history, Jews in Venice, Jews in communism, I start my statement with a number of caveats, one of which is that I am the least politically correct person on campus, of course. But most importantly, I say, folks, you came here to learn three things. You didn't come here to learn something about Jews in Venice, the communism, the Talmud, or anything like that. You came here not for that. You came here to study with me and to learn from me three things. First, how to frame a question. Second, how to delve into primary sources. And third, how to contextualize the issue we discuss. That is to say, critical skills, right? Not to learn from me how things really were, but critical skills, questioning what I'm saying, challenging me, framing questions. I believe I'm answering your question.
I think the Ukrainians have to do more of that.
Thank you.
At this point, I would like to thank Professor for a wonderful presentation and also for
Great presentation, yeah,
Great.
wonderful. Yeah.
no argument here.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay.
So if you have more questions.